Now that I'm on my villain arc, I thought I would make enemies out of the SocDems. Cause why not? When I uploaded my, responding to my old communism video, just several people that, are probably new to the channel just jumped on and were like, well, what about the SocDems? How do you feel about the SocDems? Hey, bestie, I don't like social democracy. Just to be very clear, I'm talking about social democrats or people that are into social democracy. Technically, there is a difference between social democracy and democratic socialism, but I'm going to tell you right now, people use them interchangeably, and that's why I don't see much of a difference, because people will be like, oh my god, I'm such a democratic socialist, and then suck AOC's cock, and it's like, I don't think you understand what democratic socialism is. I don't think you understand what a social democracy is. I think you use them interchangeably when they are technically not the same thing. And you know what? I don't like either of them, but for different reasons. Technically, Bernie Sanders self-identifies as a democratic socialist, but that man is a SocDem. To put it simply, if you want to base your model of government off of the Scandinavian model of government, you are a social democrat. I don't know how to break it to you guys, but being a capitalist country with healthcare is not socialism. So I find it a little bit bullshit that people like Bernie Sanders self-identify as a democratic socialist when they're really a social democrat. But, people don't know the difference anyways and will use them interchangeably, despite the fact that that's not how that works. But, there's only so much I can do with how much liberals have invaded the left at this point. I'm just gonna go through and explain why I fucking hate social democracy. Well, first and foremost, social democracy is a liberal ideology. They are not leftists. They like to think they are leftists. Bestie, you are barely in the center. I'll give it to you, you're closer to the left than neoliberals. That's not a very high bar I'm setting for you, though. And I don't like liberals, so... And because they're liberals, SocDems in the United States, at the very least, suck the cock of the Democratic Party. Hey, I don't know who needs to hear this, but all politicians are bad. All of them. Yes, even AOC and Bernie Sanders. Please stop idolizing politicians. They have an exorbitant amount of power that they force upon a lot of people, and I think that's bad. Maybe giving a small group of people a lot of power is a bad thing. Have you ever thought about that? Yeah, SocDems like the Democratic Party, or at least the progressive side of it, and the progressive side of it is not much better than the neoliberal side of it. I don't know, anybody that sucks the cock of a politician is immediately no respect for that. And it's even worse because the Democratic Party and liberalism is responsible for a whole lot of shit that they always blame the conservatives for, even though it was a joint mission. A lot of the horrible things that the government does is a joint mission between conservatives and liberals, because they are not that far apart in ideology. And what's even more annoying about SocDems is they think we can reform this. No, you cannot reform this. I'm sorry. I don't know who needs to hear this, but none of this can be reformed. And they think that they can do that through the Democratic Party. First and foremost, not only are we not going to get abolition through the Democratic Party, we aren't going to get reform through the Democratic Party either. Don't make me tap the sign. Don't make me do it. Read the fucking sign. Yeah, the Democratic Party single-handedly stands in the way of pretty much all progress in the United States. They tend to blame the conservatives on that, but they're supposed to be the opposition to the conservatives. But their opposition is weak. They are a weak party. And because they are weak and the only opposition to conservatives with power at the very least, that makes them the only thing standing in the way of actual progress in the United States. That's why I don't like liberals and the Democratic Party, but that's also why I don't like it when SocDems preach about, reform through the Democratic Party. You're not going to get it. You're not going to get the reform. The Democratic Party is fucking useless. You cannot reform systems of hierarchy because they will always go back to being abusive because they're systems of hierarchy. So they will always go back to the original issue if you keep trying to reform them. It will always return. SocDems are so interesting because they scream about pragmatism a lot, and they scream about reality a lot, which I find very, very funny because the reality is you cannot reform this. That is the reality. You cannot reform systems that are based in hierarchy. So the fact that they're screaming about reform and then screaming about reality is very silly to me, especially considering there is no basis in reality. I mean, where's the reality? Where's the reform you're speaking of? Because there is none, because the Democratic Party and all parties like it across the world are fucking useless. So I'm trying to understand here where you think the reality is. What's absolutely hilarious about SocDems is that some of them self-identify as socialists. No, you are not. But they think that we can maintain a capitalist mode of production and still fight climate change. No, we can't. Actually, we cannot. I don't know who's telling you guys that we can continue having a state that allows, wage labor and just capitalist modes of production and, the garnering of capital and still fight climate change. No, we can't. That's not possible. That 70% of CO2 emissions are made by companies statistic has really fucked some people up, I think, because they seem to think that if we wipe out privately owned companies and make them all state-owned to some extent, or, the state gets involved, that suddenly we're not going to have CO2 emissions anymore. I don't know how to tell you this. Yes, that statistic is true to some extent, even though it leaves out a lot of issue. That statistic's a little... It leaves out a lot of stuff, and yeah. But that's not the point. They seem to think that, oh no, we've toppled our capitalist overlords and, still have a social democracy, which is not toppling our capitalist overlords, but that's besides the point. They think that they can continue living the way they do. No, you can't. Yes, right now, we don't have a lot of choices. Because of those companies. But let's say those companies are overthrown. Cool. You do need to do a little bit of life change. There needs to be some degrowth. And I don't know how you think that you can maintain your way of life, at least in the imperial core, and fight climate change. You can't. I'm sorry. This will sound like vegetarian vegan ranting right now, but the climate just cannot, it just can't maintain factory farming. It can't. The amount of meat you guys eat is too much for the planet to handle. The climate cannot take factory farming, point blank. And without factory farming, we cannot maintain the amount of meat you guys eat. So what I'm saying is there will need to be a little bit of life change in order to fight climate change. But most of you don't want to do that. Most of you want to live in your pragmatic, realistic situation where you think you can maintain your way of life and fight climate change just because the state gives you health care. No, I'm sorry. That's not how it works. There needs to be radical change in order for that to happen. And unfortunately, we're already sort of past the point of no return to a certain extent. I mean, some of the damage can be mitigated at this point, which, I mean, is important to remember, but there is no stopping the chain of events. Things are going to happen, whether you like it or not. And I think that's what I mean by, like, they are the most idealistic realists that have ever existed, because they genuinely just don't want to admit that their way of life needs to change in order for climate change to be mitigated at this point. I'm sorry, you need to give up one of your 3 cars and maybe use the train every once in a while. They have this idealistic idea of how SocDem societies can possibly, stop climate change while maintaining our way of life. No, I'm sorry. The Imperial Core needs to get over themselves for a second so we can stop this. You're right in that we cannot do it as a people by ourselves, and that the companies do need to be fucked with, per se, in order for anything to be mitigated at this point. But you are wrong in that you don't have to do anything, ever. Also, SocDems, especially in the United States, don't seem to understand that the way of life in SocDem European countries are supported by imperialism. Their way of life is like that because they do economic and, there has been past imperialism. In order to maintain your way of life in the imperial core as is, imperialism needs to happen, which is why I say you might need to give up your way of life in order to, not do imperialism anymore. There needs to be a bit of degrowth in order to, leave the global south alone. You live the way you do because your country fucks over other countries economically, mostly, and it probably fucked over another country more than economically in the past. So SocDems, they tend to advocate for countries that exist based on the suffering of other peoples, and, they're usually ethno-states that have increasingly right-wing foreign policy. So it's always really, really weird when SocDems are like, I love fucking Sweden or something. It's like, okay, so you want a capitalist country with healthcare that is the way it is because it benefits economically from the global south and is an ethno-state with right-wing foreign policy. I don't think these are the countries we should be modeling after. To be fair, I would like to abolish the state altogether, but if you're really going to be a shill for the state, I would not simp over countries that hate immigrants. A lot of SocDems that claim to be left-wing and socialists will completely abandon the cause when they get healthcare, especially the ones in the United States. Or specifically, the ones in the United States. Sorry, we're the ones without healthcare. So what I'm saying is a lot of United States leftists will probably abandon the cause or not care as much when you get healthcare. And it looks much like liberals when Joe Biden got elected. They completely stopped caring altogether because they think that's how this works. So to sum it up, I don't like social democracy because you're basically just a capitalist that wants public programs. You're a liberal that claims they're a leftist. You simp over countries that are ethno-states with right-wing foreign policy. You seem to think that hierarchy can be reformed and not go back to the original problem. You claim to be realists when you are advocating for unrealistic expectations for the state, which will always end up being oppressive. You don't want to change your way of life to stop imperialism and climate change. And a lot of you are just white young people in the United States that don't really think of anyone else but yourselves, and that's proven by the discourse on leftist Twitter as of recently, where a lot of SocDems have outed themselves as eugenicists. Wow, color me not surprised. SocDems seem to always end up outing themselves as fascists. Like, they end up, outing themselves as, like, transmedicalists, exclusionists, eugenicists. They don't like, liberation. They don't like it. They want to reform the oppression that we have now. And that's the problem, really. But anyways, stop asking me if I like SocDems. I do not.